Chapter 3 of The Red Badge of Courage. Uh, in the morning, they were called out early and hurried along a narrow road that led deep into the forest. It was during this rapid march that the regiment lost many of the marks of being new. The men had begun to count the miles upon their fingers, and they grew tired. "Sore feet and not enough food, that's all," said a loud soldier. There were hot faces and angry words. After a time, they began to throw away the bags they carried on their backs. Some dropped them unconcernedly down. Others hid them carefully, planning to return for them at some convenient time. Men took off their thick shirts. Soon, few carried anything but their necessary clothing, blankets, canteens, and guns. "You can now eat and shoot," said the tall soldier. I got my accents all backwards. "You can now eat and shoot," said the tall soldier to the youth. "That's all you want to do." This, of course, mimics a lot of things that we heard in earlier accounts of battles. The Union soldiers, remember, they had wool coats and lots of equipment, whereas the South had cotton and almost no equipment. So this really well-prepared Northern Army, they're maybe a little overburdened, and so they end up getting rid of a lot of things that are heavy and throwing them away, which, you know, is kind of foolish when you think about it. But I guess on a hot southern day, you don't want to have all that weight generating more heat and making you more tired. There was a sudden change now among the men. The regiment was no longer the heavy, slow army of theory, but the light, speedy army of reality. The regiment, relieved of a burden, received new strength. But the regiment did not yet have the appearance of experienced soldiers. Regiments who had been in battle were likely to be very small groups of men. Remember, regiments turn into battalions when they lose a certain percentage of their soldiers, and that sort of implies experience. Even the word battalion has battle in it. And the letters on the flags were still new and beautiful. The youth returned to his theory that he was part of a blue display. On one gray dawn, however, the youth was kicked in the leg by the tall soldier, and then, before he was entirely awake, he found himself running down a forest road among men who were already breathing heavily from the first effects of speed. His canteen repeatedly struck his leg. His gun fell off his shoulder at each step, and his cap fell uncertain upon his head. He could hear the men whisper in broken sentences. "Say, what's all this about? What are we hurrying this way for? Billy, stay off my feet. You run like a cow." And a soldier's loud voice could be heard. "What the devil are they in such a hurry for?" From a distance came a sudden sound of gunfire. He was surprised. As he ran with his friends, he tried hard to think, but all he knew was that if he fell down, those coming behind would step upon him. All his power seemed to be needed to guide him over and past objects. He felt carried along by the mob. The sun spread revealing rays, and one by one regiments burst into view like men just born of the earth. The youth realized that the time had come. He was about to be measured. For a moment, facing his great test, he felt like a baby, and the flesh over his heart seemed very thin. He seized time to look about him carefully. He instantly saw that it would be impossible for him to escape from the regiment. It enclosed him. All there was iron laws of custom and law on four sides. He was in a moving box. This is a good image of what it's like to march in formations. Remember, they still had line infantry back in the day. That was sort of a holdover from the old Roman and even Greek and medieval ways of warfare. Which was going to change, and we obviously don't have line infantry anymore. So, but you can imagine being in line and surrounded by troops on all sides. There's nowhere to go. You can't run away from battle. So he's being forced into it, whether he's a brave man or not. And so his courage is sort of superfluous at this moment, or lack thereof. And there were iron laws of custom and law on four sides. He was in a moving box. As he realized this fact, he thought that he had never wished to come to war. He had not joined the army by his own choice. Well, he had, but whatever. He had been dragged by merciless government, and now they were taking him out to be killed. The regiment slipped down a hill and crossed a little stream. That's talking about the regiment like it's a single being. That's a sort of personification there as well. They climbed the hill on the other side. Guns began to roar. Here the youth forgot many things as he felt a sudden curiosity. He hurried to the top with great speed. He expected a battle scene. There were some little fields surrounded by a forest. Spread over the grass and among the trees, he could see moving lines of men running here and there and firing. A dark battle line lay upon a sun-struck clearing. A flag blew in the light wind. Other regiments climbed up the hill. The brigade was formed in the line of battle. After a pause, the brigade started slowly through the forest behind a small group of soldiers who melted into the scene to appear again farther forward. These were always busy as bees, deeply concerned in their battles, their little battles. Busy as bees is a simile as well, but it's also sort of a common saying. The youth tried to observe everything. He did not use care to avoid trees and branches, and his forgotten feet were always striking against stones or getting caught in the low bushes. He saw that the figures ahead, and their noises were red and shocking against the gentle land of softened greens and browns. So now we have a contrast between the military and nature that's worth keeping an eye on. We have the softened, nature, and then we have the hard sounds of gunfire, and we have the reds of muzzle flashes versus the greens and browns. It looked like the wrong place for a battlefield. The fighters in front interested him. Their shots into the bushes and at distant trees spoke to him of sorrows, hidden, secret. Once the line of men came upon the body of a dead soldier. Hey, the first evidence of warfare here in the ground. Let's see what Henry sees, what Crane writes. This might be worth noting. Once the line of men came upon the body of a dead soldier. He lay upon his back, staring at the sky. He was dressed in an ugly suit of yellowish brown. That's that butternut color that the dye of Confederate soldiers' uniforms faded to. Let's see. So it is a Confederate soldier. In an ugly suit of yellowish brown. The line opened to avoid the body. The dead man forced a way for himself. That's sort of paradoxical. He's dead. He's not moving. But the lines of infantry sort of move around him like water around a stone in a stream. The youth looked sharply at the ashen face. He wanted to walk around the body and stare. It was the desire of the living to try and read in the dead eyes the answer to the question of death. All right, so that's all we get from that guy. During the march, the eagerness which the youth had developed when out of view of the field rapidly reduced to nothing. His curiosity was quite easily satisfied. If an exciting scene had caught him with its wild action as he came to the top of the hill, he might have gone running forward. This advance upon nature was too calm. He had opportunity to think. He had time in which to wonder about himself and to attempt to question his feelings. So, if he had been forced into the rush of battle without the time to think about it, maybe things would be different, but having time to think is probably bad for courage, especially seeing a dead guy and then having time to think about the dead guy. The quick thought came to him that the generals did not know what they were doing. Certainly Union generals, that's probably a safe assumption. Suddenly, those close forests would reveal countless guns pointing at him. Iron-like enemy brigades would appear in the rear. He and his friends were going to be killed. So he's starting to overthink. He's starting to worry about ambush and all those sorts of things. The generals were fools. The enemy would soon eat the whole army. His angry eyes searched about him, expecting to see the sure approach of his death. The line, broken into moving parts by the ground, went calmly forward through the fields and forests. The youth looked at the men nearest him, and he saw mainly the expressions of deep interest, as if they were looking for something. Most of the men appeared quiet and thoughtful. They were going to look at war, the red animal. This is a personification of war. It's red. Of course, blood is the color of red. But calling war the red animal, I think, is interesting. It harkens back to this Civil War idea of seeing the elephant. You guys may have remembered that from an earlier lecture, that if you see the elephant, it represents, seeing war, and so it's sort of an aphorism. In this case, we're calling it a red animal. The blood-drinking god, that's a reference probably to Ares. We're going back to ancient Greece, the god of war. And they were deeply occupied in this march. The youth slowed his pace, with frightened glances at the sky. He was surprised by a young officer of his regiment, a lieutenant, who began to beat him with a sword, called out in loud and unfriendly voice, "Come, young man, get on there, no falling behind here." He changed his pace with proper speed, and he hated the lieutenant, who had no respect for fine minds. He was a mere animal. This is interesting too, that somehow war is associated with animalism, with some sort of animal nature of human beings, and thought is more associated with peace or something like that. So that's interesting as well. After a time, the brigade was stopped in the shady light of a forest. The busy fighters ahead were still shooting. Many men in the regiment began piling tiny hills in front of them. They used stones, sticks, and earth, anything they thought might protect them from a bullet. So they're building a sort of primitive trench, if you will. Some built quite large ones, while others seemed satisfied with little ones. In a short time, there was quite a wall among the fronts of the regiment. Soon, however, they were ordered to leave that place. This shocked the youth. He forgot his worries about the advance movement. "Well then, why did they march us out here?" he demanded of a tall soldier. The latter, with calm faith, began a heavy explanation, although he had been compelled to leave a little protection of stones and earth, to which he had devoted much care and skill. When the regiment was moved to another position, each man's regard for his safety caused another line of small hills. The men ate their noon meal behind a third line of hills. So this shows sort of the efforts of combat, and you move, you build a fortification, you move, you build a fortification. There's a lot of wasted effort in battle. They were moved from this one also. They were marched from place to place with apparent lack of purpose. The youth had been taught that a man became another thing in a battle. He saw his preservation in such a change. Therefore, this waiting was painful to him. He had no patience. He considered that the generals lacked purpose. He began to complain to the tall soldier. "I can't wait like this much longer," he cried. "I don't see what good it does to make us tire our legs out for nothing." He wished to return to camp, knowing that this affair was only a blue display. He said that like 7 times. I think that's interesting. The idea that the Union Army exists only as a display rather than as an actual fighting unit. Or he wanted to go into battle and discover that he had been a fool in his doubts and was, in truth, a man of customary courage. The strain of present circumstances he felt to be unbearable. The tall soldier ate his bread in a carefree manner. "Oh, I suppose we must go around the country just to keep them from getting too close, or develop them, or something." "Well," cried the youth, still nervous, "I'd rather do almost anything than march around all day, doing no good to anyone and just tiring ourselves." In the afternoon, the regiment went back over the same ground it had traveled in the morning. The land then ceased to threaten the youth. He had been close to it and become familiar with it. When, however, they began to pass into a new region, his old fears came back. Once he thought that it would be better to get killed immediately and to end all his troubles. Regarding death thus out of the corner of his eye, he knew it was nothing but rest. He was filled with a momentary surprise that he should have made a great problem over the mere matter of getting killed. It's interesting too. He's walked so far, he's felt everything's so pointless that now he's like, just kill me. I'm tired of this marching and doing nothing. I'm so bored. I think that's interesting too. So he's waffling back and forth over a lot of ideas. He would die. He would go to some place where he would be understood. It was useless to expect respect from such men as the lieutenant. He must look to the grave for understanding. The gunfire increased. With it was faraway cheering. Then the youth saw soldiers running. They were followed by more gunfire. After a time, the hot, dangerous flashes of the rifles were seen. Smoke clouds went slowly across the field. The noise grew into a roar. The brigade ahead of them and on the right went into action. It was as if it had burst apart, and thereafter it lay stretched in the distance behind a long gray wall, at which one had to look twice to make sure that it was smoke. The youth forgot his plan of getting killed. He stared speechlessly. His eyes grew wide with the action of the scene. His mouth was open a little. All right. And so we end chapter 3. We're continuing the rising action. Things are getting a little bit more intense. We're also getting a lot of introspection from Henry, the protagonist. He keeps waffling back and forth across ideas and doesn't really settle on anything. Remember that we're getting the perspective of the battle from a narrator who is, it's focusing only on one character, and you're limited. You only know the perspective of what that character sees and understands. And so we're not getting an overhead view of the battle. We're getting the view of the battle out of Henry Fleming's eyes, and we're getting his thoughts and ideas as he's marching around the battlefield. So We've poised ourselves for some action, maybe sort of a miniature climax. We want to see what's going on with Henry. Is he going to be a coward? Is he going to be brave? He's going to have his opportunity in Chapter 4. So stick around, and we'll get to that one soon.